what's the state of subscriptions right now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that one of the biggest factors in the subscription sort of industry is the macroeconomic conditions that consumers are facing. Rising cost of living, rising inflation. A lot of people are making decisions about what subscriptions can they absolutely not live without. And that's been a little bit of a headwind for the news business. I would say overall, if you scale back and like really look at how digital subscriptions have behaved over the last few years, the big trend was 2020 was a huge uptick. Obviously, with all the breaking news happening, a lot of people decided to pay for a digital subscription. In 2021, the name of the game really became retention. How do you keep those people and continue proving that your subscription is valuable when the world's not quite as falling apart as it was a year ago? Now, I think the big change is really making the process of retaining and acquiring digital subscribers a lot more sophisticated. So there's a lot more effort put toward dynamic paywalls, presenting people with offers at opportune moments, only targeting people that might, stay for longer and actually be a years-long subscriber versus like a flash in the pan subscriber who's just on board for 2 months with the discount. So it's a little bit of a refinement process, but definitely some of these economic headwinds have publishers concerned about, the strength of their offerings.
So how do you do that? Do you have to, the types of things that you cover, that's how you retain subscribers? Or is it the types of stories you do, the types of events, the types of perks you offer? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely all of those factors and then probably more factors. I mean, if there was like an easy way or easy answer for how do you keep people subscribed, then everybody would be doing that. Some of the big factors that everybody points to in terms of retention are habit. If somebody is reading a newsletter from you every day, that's really huge. If they're consuming a podcast on a regular basis, basically the more often they're visiting, the higher likelihood they have of sticking around. So publishers are using a lot of strategies to try and keep people engaged and engage people who have lapsed. So habit is definitely a big one. And then like the good thing is the biggest driver of subscriptions and the biggest retainer of subscriptions is valuable original reporting, scoops, deep investigations. You break news that's incredibly critical and you put it behind a paywall. That's really the best way to keep people and acquire new people. So that's a nice sort of synergy because that means that reporters are incentivized to do really good journalism because that's what keeps people on board. But of course, that's way easier said than done.
Yeah, but it's also only good journalism for business, right? You're like, it's mostly what we're talking about is like business actionable business journalism or political journalism. So that means that you focus, all these companies become more business focused or like deal focused.
Definitely. I mean, and that's part of the problem, right? Is like, if we look at digital subscriptions as this sort of lifeboat for the news media and say, oh, well, if advertising is falling, that's okay because they can get people to pay via subscription. It's a lot easier to get someone to pay for a subscription to the Financial Times if that's going to help them do their job on Wall Street more effectively and make them more money, or if you're a politician, you have to be subscribed. Yes, or Adweek if you're in the marketing industry, it's a must-have, little promo there. But that definitely does put like the entertainment and culture publications, a little bit up the creek because it's a lot harder to have a clear value proposition when you do music criticism or you write like a life and arts review or a cooking blog or whatever the case is. It's harder to say this is $20 a month and it's justified when it's recreational kind of content.
Are you seeing any publications that are doing that in the broader general news or less business focused? Are they doing it in some way? How are they dealing with this?
Well, I think the New York Times is a really interesting example here because they had this huge uptick in digital subscribers in 2020 when the world was falling apart. But then as news fatigue has hit, they've said to themselves, the way to keep people is to bring more kinds of content offerings into our subscription package. So they bought Wordle at the beginning of the year. They bought The Athletic at the beginning of the year. They're really expanding their cooking offering and their games offering. So these are all ways of continuing to keep people subscribed that are not exclusively news-based. So
it's sort of like the Netflix of news.
Yeah, the more that you can offer people and the more kind of different, I guess, reward centers you can offer, the more likely someone's going to stick around. So there might be a sort of increase in bundling. I wouldn't be surprised if publishers start to team up in order to make themselves a little bit more indispensable.
Netflix subscriptions declined so much. This was like the kind of the bellwether for subscriptions in general for content. What does that mean for everyone else?
Yeah, that was a really, I mean, it is a bellwether, but there's been a lot of hair splitting as to like, well, that's the streaming universe. And it's a little bit of an indication for consumer behavior, but it's definitely not like a one-to-one in terms of, you can't really look at Netflix and say, well, that is going to be what happens to the news media. But you can look at it as an indication of people are getting a little bit more particular about what they subscribe to. The days of easy growth are behind us. For any kind of digital subscription. So yeah, the bar's been raised a little bit. And I think Netflix and its sort of slowdown in growth was the indication of that, for anybody trying to get consumers to pay for digital subscription.
And what do you think about you just mentioned bundling. We've talked about the unbundling. Brian Morrissey at the rebooting just had a column about the rebundling. How is that playing out?
First of all, Brian Morrissey, very good source. I think I read that same column that you're talking about. Yeah, media is pendular, right? Like we swing back and forth between breaking everything apart and putting it all back together. I think with the economic outlook souring a little bit, people are looking for savings and combining a bunch of properties into one and giving the consumer more value for that is going to be a way to stay relevant as people are pinching their pennies. So I think it's largely going to be the product of, the economic turmoil, and more places are going to say, hey, we have to, come together or die. What
you're saying is the smaller type publications would join to have scale, or because they have to, because they'll run out of money?
Both. Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. The scale is a huge thing, especially as we're talking about deprecation of third-party cookies. If you want to be working with advertisers, you have to be able to reach 100 million people. So there's certainly an incentive to come together for that reason. But I think, Substack is a great example. I currently pay for a few Substacks, but if I was really trying to start cutting my budget back, I would prefer if they could combine into one and I just had to pay the same price. So I think that phenomenon is going to occur on a larger scale, whether it's like local news or like you see the New York Times buying The Athletic. Last year, there was a bunch of big mergers. There's still all these digital media companies, Vice, BDG, Vox Media, that are kind of constantly in conversations for acquisition, mergers, et cetera. So I think that in the next 6 months, we might see a huge uptick in that.
So before we move on to the next subject, so people are expecting a recession. A lot of economists, a lot of people, especially tech companies, have already started laying off, doing huge layoffs. So I'm sure the first thing companies cut in their spending is marketing. Are you seeing a lot of publishers adjusting for that or preparing for that?
We're certainly seeing a lot of publishers prepare for it, but the word on the street, like literally you're just checking every week. So far, ad spend, what would you call it, forecasts have been reduced a little bit, but they're still predicted to grow. So publishers definitely have their finger to the wind to try and predict if there's going to be a big decrease in ad spend. There probably will be a small decrease. That's pretty guaranteed. But in terms of, is the industry going to completely run dry? The jury's still out on that. And I would say, kind of like I prefaced with in the beginning of our conversation, it's really helpful that publishers have all these different avenues now, right? So they can be serving their audience on audio and newsletters, et cetera. So even if ad spend does pull back a little bit, they're a bit insulated from that.
Yeah, and this seems to be a recession that's different from anything that I've ever seen, where it's more like a supply side recession, where it's like demand is high, unemployment is low, and inflation is growing, which actually can be good for retailers, good for different sectors. So it's an interesting place where we're expecting a recession because of inflation, not because of low demand. So it is an interesting space where there might be companies that see it as an opportunity in this growing shift to online or the growing shift to e-commerce that we saw over COVID.
Yeah, I actually was speaking with a source the other week, and they said something along the lines of, to your point, like unemployment is not a terrible problem at the moment, and this person was predicting
the problem is lack of employment.
Yeah, this source was telling me that this might not actually affect businesses in the same way. This might be more of a consumer recession rather than a recession that's really going to harm companies. So they were saying that B2B might sort of sail through this, whereas more of these consumer-focused publishers are going to be the ones who, see a lot of headwinds.
Or at least all the headwinds will be delayed down as things move through the economy. Please like and subscribe so the YouTube algorithm will show our videos to more people. Also join our Substack newsletter for exclusive updates, or if you're on the go, find us wherever you listen to your audio podcasts. Click on one of the links to find our next video, and also check out the links below for more information. Thanks so much for watching.